To our Commvault LinkedIn Live. I'm Thomas Bryant with Commvault, and today I'm going to be a moderator for a fantastic panelist of guests. We're going to spend a bit of time today talking about the 2024 Cyber Recovery Readiness Report, and it covers the responses from over 1,000 cybersecurity and IT leaders, most of them in senior leadership. So, David, John, welcome to the show. David, if you could maybe share a little bit about yourself and your role.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks for having me, Thomas. Really appreciated the opportunity to come talk and loved reading the report. I thought it was extremely valuable. I've been bouncing around this industry for about 40 years now. I've been a CISO twice, 2 Fortune 500 companies, did a couple years Big Four consulting, and retired most recently a couple of years ago from Dell Technologies, where I led security for their global supply chain. It's the largest of their businesses, business units, about 60 billion. For all that, I was with one firm for 28 years, the United States Air Force. I'm a retired cyber warfare officer, spending time down here in San Antonio. And today I'm here as a senior analyst with Tag Cyber. Love the organization, love what we bring to the industry.
Awesome. Great. It's great to have you here. John, could you introduce yourself as well, please?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the technical glitch there. I'm John Rasmussen. I'm also a senior analyst with Tag Cyber and been here since about January. My past, I have over 30 years in the technology space, mostly focusing on healthcare and government space. I've been a 4-time CISO, and now I am doing some consulting work.
We make that sound like we were in prison, like when we say 2-time, 4-time, it's not actually been that bad.
I've got to imagine it's a very eventful career anytime you bring in security into things. So before we get into some of the questions, I do want to spend a few minutes just kind of covering some of the key things from the Cyber Recovery Readiness Report. So the first thing I would like to talk about a little bit is the key findings. And I'm hoping that that'll show up on the screen. I'm not a technical whiz here. But really, I think there's 3 big things that I think I want to share with everyone. The first is that what we found by and large is that those organizations that have been breached, it changes their perspective in when they're preparing for their next breach. And so it changes the approach, it changes the tactics, it changes really everything that they're doing and making them think more about what may come next. And related to that, a lot of what we see from folks is it's a combination of not just technology, right? Technology is just a piece of it, but it's the technology and the capabilities that it brings. It's changing the culture and changing the competencies of the people within the organization. And the third kind of key finding that we found from the report is that you can't really cut corners. When you think about cyber resilience, it has to be comprehensive. It has to be across the board. You can't just focus on one area or another. You have to look at the entire spectrum of your organization. And when we looked across the answers from these 1,000 plus cybersecurity and IT leaders, there were kind of 5 markers that showed up that kind of defined, that we saw time and time again, that define mature organizations. And so those kind of 5 different pillars are, number 1, security tools about early warning and risk. Because if you can, number 1, de-risk your organization, it can help reduce any sort of footprint for bad actors to grab a hold of. And knowing earlier in an attack is critical. We see sometimes bad actors come in and dwell for very short periods of time, and other times they're in for very long periods of time. And if you can find out sooner when they're in your organization, it can mitigate the breadth or the blast radius of what is affected within those systems. Second, a known clean dark site or secondary system is critical to being able to get back up and running. We see it time and time again in the industry where there's bad actors getting in, and they're even getting into things like the firmware, the BIOS, into not just machines, but printers and other IoT devices where they can reinfect. So being able to have a clean, isolated environment is really key for being able to then be resilient and get back up and running. And related to that is the third marker in terms of having immutable data. It seems a little passe and to some in the industry that we're talking about immutability, but it's actually still an ongoing issue for a lot of organizations, is making sure that they have that 3-2-1-1 being one of those copies being an immutable backup data source. Again, kind of as we mentioned earlier, or as I mentioned in the key finding, having defined runbooks. Our CMO here at Commvault shares a familiar tagline with a famous boxer where everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's true. If you don't have a plan, you get sucked into action bias and you just start doing things because you feel the need to do something and it's not necessarily the right thing. So having defined roles and processes is critical. And then the fifth marker from a recovery readiness standpoint is being able to have measures to show how you are ready and to show the level of risk to your organization. If you can't measure it, you can't define it, right? Or you need to be able to define it and be able to measure yourself against those goals and to measure risks so that you can de-risk your organization. You're never going to completely de-risk everything. There's always going to be that case where somehow, some way, there's something that you didn't plan for and account for. But anytime that you can show you're continuously improving and working towards that ultimate goal is a great thing. And so these markers, that's great. It sounds awesome. But what does that actually translate into the real world? This is the thing that it was shocking to me when we looked at, okay, these organizations that are out there that are actually that are saying, hey, we're mature organizations. How much better are they, from self-reporting in terms of being able to recover? And 41% faster recoveries for those organizations that reported themselves as mature as to those that only had one or maybe none of these 5 markers. That's very, very telling. And in fact, only 4% of our overall respondents said that they were 4 or 5 of those key markers. But those that do are able to recover and be resilient much better than those that are not that far along on their journey. And even those that had 2 or 3 markers, they were still 24% faster across the board in being able to make their organizations resilient. So I guess I'm going to stop talking and turn over to our panelists and say, I'll start with you, David. Do these resonate with you in your experience?
Absolutely. And I'll pick on number 4, specifically defining the run books and roles and processes. And I believe that infers exercising those, right? And so the idea that you are doing these things on a regular basis that tests the other 4 and making sure that things work. When you take this approach that are described in the report with respect to these 5 markers, you can almost do a real baseline against any type of disruption or event that has potential material impact to an organization. Today, it's ransomware. What will it be tomorrow? Not really sure, but those things can evolve pretty quickly. And so this gives you a good framework and a baseline in which to do this. What I would say is that the idea of maturity when you're doing these things is relative, right? If you do all these things once, congratulations, you've achieved that. But you have to do them continuously. And I think that you made that comment earlier, Thomas, is to make sure that that you're focused on these things. If it was just one and done, if I compared it to football, my beloved Philadelphia Eagles would be the Super Bowl champs every year. So, but that's just not the reality. So you got to make sure that this is a consistent and persistent activity.
Yeah. John, one of the things that I gleaned from this data is that I mentioned it like around the breach changing perspective of what's important versus those that haven't been breached. Are companies having to learn the hard way when it comes to cyber recovery and being prepared?
I would say yes. Absolutely. Usually the first time your leadership will find out you have a cybersecurity program is after there's been a cybersecurity incident or a breach. Still, the level of education for leadership teams places cybersecurity responsibility in the IT part of the organization, where they're not necessarily evaluating the value of the data or the systems to the overall business. And so when you think of these 5 measures here, you're not just thinking of it from an IT perspective, you're thinking of it from an organizational perspective. And you have to have ownership from senior leadership in an organization to understand and qualify what's important when you're going to come back online from an incident.
Well, I mean, if they're learning from this kind of as they're going, I mean, are there common mistakes and pitfalls that a lot of organizations make when they're developing recovery plans?
Absolutely. One of them is not knowing what assets they have. And when I say assets, that could be IT system, that could be human resources, that could be other things. If you as a cybersecurity leader don't know what assets are key to keeping your business moving, you might recover the wrong thing first. So you might assume in healthcare that it's the electronic medical record to get back online right away. But if you talk to other people in the organization, you may realize it's the payroll system. Because if nurses and doctors are not getting paid, are they going to come and treat the patients? And so having that understanding of what your highest risk levels are helps to build into your recovery plan.
And I would add on that and John mentioned it, there is assumptions. There are just literally too many assumptions that are made about either readiness plans or capabilities or even timelines. A very large incident that I worked before I retired, where a partner within our not within our company, but a company partner was hit by a ransomware attack. That attack took it was during Log4j. It took all of 11 minutes for them to get almost their entire environment bricked. What they did not anticipate was that how long it was going to take, and they had never verified how long it was going to take to restore. They had a good idea of what had happened, how it happened, which was fortunate because that's not always the case. So when they were ready to restore, they found that they had 15 to 20 years worth of backup, right? And this goes into the readiness of the data and the isolated environment and those kinds of things. So the restore all of that was exponentially. And so the lesson learned that we took away from all this stuff, and again, as part of a continuous cycle, was what are we backing up? What is why are we backing up? And do we still need to do that? I don't know if that makes sense to you guys. Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I've worked with some organizations that have had similar things. One of the things that I think is interesting is when people build systems, they plan for production use cases, right? And being able for things to meet certain levels of performance. But what they don't plan for is, okay, great, that, 20 years worth of data that's now in that database. If I need to recover that, I'm going to have to break laws of physics to get it back in a few hours. Like, you just can't move data that fast, or disks can't write it that fast. And so it creates again, another sort of dilemma of, what do we back up? What do we really need to restore? And to your point, like, what's that priority? Are there other things, David, that you would say companies could do to better prepare themselves for threats?
Yes. And I would say, extend your collaboration to your business partners. The thing about, we talk about this in terms of cyber recovery readiness, but the reality is that the systems that are involved in this are not owned and managed by security teams, right? They're done by adjacent teams. So extend your collaboration, talk to valued outcomes that are inferred in these 5 markers and say, this is what we're trying to achieve. How can we work with you to do that, to bring this level of maturity, not only to our organization, but to your organization, so we're ready. It's a division of labor. Everybody has a job. And so we're going to help you. We're going to do our best to detect and to mitigate cyber threats, but they are going to get in sometimes. And when they get in, we need to be a team that collectively looks at that. So extend your collaboration would be my biggest piece of advice when thinking about this. That's not technical by any means, but it is super, super important.
Yeah. How about you, John?
So just to add on to what Dave was saying there, when you're thinking about your business development, and a lot of people go through mergers and acquisitions, you should have that partnership developed right away with the M&A team so that you're applying consistent security controls as you're bringing something on or as you're divesting something. Because, losing something is not a great position to be in, too, after you've sold the company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so actually, I want to touch back on a point on collaboration that you just made, David. I almost can see collaboration being one of a challenge as well. I mean, do you see that the collaboration across different silos, business units and whatnot as a big challenge, or are there other challenges that are just as big, maybe bigger?
I think it's probably a convergence of the two things that I mentioned, having too many assumptions and the lack of collaboration. So, and then something that John said, which I think is giving us a bigger picture, is awareness of the systems that are most critical and most likely to impose material damage to your business. And so those collectively, when you look at those together, show the importance. Don't make assumptions on what you know about or what you're backing up. Understand what's really important to your enterprise and your business outcomes. And then, the idea that you have to come in and you have to collaborate with those groups. I've been in environments, very large companies, where people don't even know who the security organization is, where to report something to, or how they would do that. Because let's just say, for instance, that a business unit is very, very important to an enterprise suffers something like this, right? But they're not well known to the security organization. It's really difficult for the security organization to know everything about everything. And then what they find is, wow, great, they had this really good understanding of their backup system. They used Commvault. Everything was really good. They didn't really understand insider risk. They didn't understand how to really marry together that early warning about these things. And again, it's not about any one thing being more important. It's about the convergence of all of them. And that's what drives that collaboration. Guess what? The security people are going to learn a lot too about a particular system. And the system owners or managers are going to say, wow, I didn't know that I should know about those things. Knowing sometimes who to call when you're in a firefight is half the battle.
Yeah. John, how about you? Do you have any perspective you can put out there for our listeners?
Oh, sure. I have lots of perspective. So, yeah, knowing the business is half the battle. And for CISO in particular, I think you need to be that kind of a business partner that understands you have to go a mile wide and an inch deep in your organization to understand what the key drivers are for that organization. You may also have, this happens a lot, systems that are managed or maintained by departments that are way off to the side. So public safety being one of those. Typically guards, gates, and guns, they might run their own camera systems, their own alarm systems. How important are those to the safety of your organization? If somebody breaks into a camera, can they move laterally within your organization and get to other assets? Going back to Dave's point about partnerships, it's not just partnerships with business units. It's with those other organizations that might have their own IT stack within your organization.
Interesting.
Thomas, if I could add something on, I've kind of done it all because I'm an old guy. I've been in the foxhole running, I've been an incident commander up to like, how are we figuring this out and talking to audit committees and boards about it. And when I came out of the Air Force and joined Big Four Consulting, as I was talking to audit committees and board of directors, they would, in safe spaces, they would say to me, we ask if we're secure from these things, and we get a lot of gobbledygook back from security practitioners, and we don't understand what they're talking about. And I was like, well, what do you do? Well, we just go away. And that's the wrong answer. I said, maybe it's the wrong question. And there are 3 questions that I believe that almost any practitioner at any level should ask themselves. And I'll talk about how the 5 markers answer them. Well, number 1 is do we understand and have an appreciation for what's most important to the business and its dependencies? That's the first question. Secondly is that are we ready? Are we ready to respond and recover when something bad happens. And then if the answer to the first two things is yes or close to yes, then the third thing is, how do we know? And the 5 markers answer, how do you know? And that's really what your leaders want to get to. That's what your business operators want to get to. Quite frankly, that's what your customers are counting on you knowing the answer to. And so if you're able to say, how do we know? Well, we have the security tools and we enable things that are unique risks or including insider risk. We have a known clear dark site and secondary system in place. Our environment is immutable. We have the processes and procedures and we've exercised them. And then we measure these risks and recovery routines on a regular basis to make sure we're good at it. Sound familiar? And it's not really any wonder that people that practice these things consider them, are probably in that 41% category because they do chase that level of maturity and proficiency in how they're doing this.
Yeah. So, and folks that are watching on LinkedIn Live, please interact with us, ask us questions. In fact, I want to actually kind of pivot a little bit to something that I've seen in some of the chat and around like planning specifically. So, when we talk about planning and having a cyber recovery plan, one of the things that one of the folks listening is saying, well, I have a disaster recovery plan. I think I'm fine. Is that the case? To both of you, John or David, is disaster recovery and cyber recovery the same thing? Can they use the same plan?
They're not the same plan, but they are related, right? Disaster recovery means a lot of things to a lot of people. Disaster recovery could be anything. It could be a tornado that hits a data center. It could be a labor strike. It could be any number of things. Mm-hmm. So this is an answer to data resiliency and preservation, because at the end of the day, it's the data and information that drive your company. And that's why you have a structure like this. So I often question when people say, hey, can we talk about your readiness and the resiliency of your information environment? And they say, oh yeah, we got a disaster recovery plan. And then they go back to those 3 questions and said, show me, right? Show me what you're talking about. And what I often find is that DR plans and even BCP, business continuity plans, are broader in context, but this is where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion. John, what do you think?
Yeah, so the way I look at it, and based on my experience too, we take it up another level to an incident response plan. Mm-hmm. And the incident response plan is not necessarily a technical document. It is a plan that you work with your senior leaders on so that you understand what roles are going to take place during an event. So you may be obligated to report to the SEC within a short period of time. You may have patient privacy concerns. You could have a bunch of other regulatory things in place, including insurance, which could kick in during a cyber event. You want to make sure that your leadership team understands the importance of that from the incident response plan, and your technical folks understand the disaster recovery plan. So once you've got that IRP in place, then your leadership can help you define what's most important to the organization.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Thomas, here's a little bit. I hope it's okay if I
go ahead.
Something here. So John has an incredibly deep background in healthcare, and I one of the ways I give back is I'm an adjunct professor today, and it kind of goes to everything that we've been talking about. And I called an audible one night to just do an exercise. There was something in the news about a healthcare institution being breached. It was pretty significant, caused lots of disruption. And when I challenged my students, I was like, what is the most important thing now to do? What are you going to do? What is that? And it took them a while to get there, but like, we need to be concerned about human welfare and life, preservation of life. You need to think beyond the ones and zeros of what you're doing here.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about those things. The other thing operationally, where I've been a CISO before, your SOC, your Security Operations Center, or CSOC, ISOC, whatever you're going to call it, operates in a security domain, in the cyber domain, to do those things. A lot of organizations, when they have things that go beyond this or affecting more parts of the business, they go to an incident management level, right? Where you've got lots of people. And sometimes you're the supporting or the supported function in this. And so the validity of using these markers and taking something like this report and say, does this apply? Does this help everybody when we come together in a broader incident? Because chances are, if you're pulling all the levers that something like this involves, you're going to have more people in the room than just a bunch of security pros.
Yeah. So speaking of that, there was a question earlier, and it's related to this kind of in your role as a CISO. Who's typically, or is there even a typical group that's in charge of the recovery portion of it in a cyber incident? Is it security? Is it IT? And how does that play in with the group?
It's good point. And John, can I go first? Is that okay?
Yep.
So there's a couple things. Number one, depending on the extent of the incident, first of all, it's like, what are you going to do first? So who's making the priorities for restoral and all those kinds of things? Is that higher level decision making that needs to happen in order for the people that are going to do the work to make sure what they're doing first? Your perception of what is important any given day may be completely different than what's relative to the business. So that piece, those decisions that are being made, as you look down here, what you're looking at, it's not always going to be the security team. In fact, unless it's a security system specifically that's been impacted, it's unlikely. It's going to be those system or application owners that are going to be responsible for bringing those systems back up, right?
John, what's your take?
So I absolutely agree. Every incident is going to be a different incident, and there are going to be different players who are responsible for the recovery in that incident. From the security perspective, we have our stuff that we do, planning, identification, containment, eradication, and recovery. All of this basic steps of incident response. That's where we're managing it. But as a leader in an incident response plan, which typically a CISO can be, you would work with your IT project management group to help coordinate efforts across the organization and make sure that application owner one is working on their thing while the network team is working on their thing, while the desktop team is re-imaging devices. So, everything works in concert, but you have to have that central point of management to talk up to leadership and to do appropriate planning of your resources, because we can't work 24 hours a day.
No matter how much they want us to. I mean, having gone through cyber incidents, that's the one thing that I think was the most shocking to me. It was just like the time commitment, and just like, it wasn't even so much the plan. The plan was great, and we actually kind of had somewhat semblance of one. It was you're away from your family. You're like we were living basically at our site while we were trying to recover it. And, you have just even the simple things of food and, shower and sleep and all those other things, because it's like, you've got to get the business up and running. But at least for me, like, my key takeaway out of all of this, I think, is really, you got to have a plan. And I think that's what I've heard from both of you as well, is like, you really need to spend the time creating a plan. But if you could maybe give a takeaway for each of our listeners as well. John, I'll start with you, of just like, what do you see as an actionable next step for them to get started on this process of cyber recovery and readiness?
So the first thing I think is you need leadership awareness of the potential risks. And that's going to take a good relationship with your senior leaders to develop that. Every organization should have some governance in place that you can utilize for your incident response plan, and then develop an incident response plan. And once you've developed that, have a tabletop exercise so that leadership becomes familiar with that response plan, and then update it and repeat it as necessary. Now, from a operations perspective, you should also have run books in place and recovery processes in place, which should be tested more frequently. If you have a specialized application team or an IoT team, you should do tabletop exercises with them as well.
Okay. How about you, David?
I think depending on where you are in your own maturity journal and your own readiness journey, and depending on where you're at in your journey, use this report, right? I mean, go through, take these 5 markers and say, look, even if you're, because I'm a big fan of continuous improvement, right? Never, is one of Neuman's rules of life. Never try to be the smartest person in the room. It's easy for me because I'm never the smartest person in the room. But take these 5 markers and say, we have the security tools. Do we do these things? And ask yourself, be very self-critical on doing these things, not to be finger pointing, but to learn and improve. And then ask yourself, do we have, secondary system? Do we have all those things? How much are we backing up? And then go through the 5 markers and ask yourself if you're doing those things. Look, the last thing you want to be is, and this isn't just a security thing. This is a business resiliency thing. You don't want to be a business system owner that in the thick of a fight is asked, are you going to be ready to restore your system? And you're like, wow, I'm not really sure if my cleanup or my backups are clean. I'm not sure if my process is right. You want to be able to say, Roger that. Let's get going. I'm ready. I'm ready when you're ready. But everything that I have is locked and cocked and we're ready to move. So you want to be that person. So don't overcomplicate it. Ask yourself these questions first. And if you find it yourself, you said, maybe, then assumptions exist for one reason and one reason only. That's to turn into facts. So go ahead and turn those assumptions into facts. Go ahead and get your questions answered and build that. Because again, going back to my Philadelphia Eagles theory, if it was right all the time, every time, you'd be up here all the time and they would be the Super Bowl champs. It's not going to be. So get after it and start there with these 5 questions.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, these 5 measures are great, but they're not all equally weighted. Depending on the business sector that you're in, a clean dark site might not be necessary. So you want to make sure that you budget and spend your cybersecurity money on the most important priorities of these 5 measures. And that's going to be business specific.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, John, David, thank you both for your time today. For those of you that are watching, we've got a link to the cyber readiness report that you can download that. Also, if you want to engage with us, you can, of course, come to commvault.com/the-collaborative and engage with us, learn more. And of course, we'll see you next time. So thank you again for your time, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.